Hello, welcome back to part 2 of prevention of problem behavior. Like we mentioned in the first set of videos, prevention is key. One of the most common ways to prevent challenging behavior is to change the environment. We know that we can't change the behavior, but we can help to change what supports the behavior. We are going to be talking about 3 different ways that we could prevent problem behavior by setting up the environment, increasing predictability, and looking into student engagement. A disclaimer, we realize that you are paraprofessionals and you might not have the say in how an environment is set up or how we increase the predictability or the student engagement. However, if you are ever asked for ideas, these are a few ideas that you could give to your cooperating teacher to help make the environment better for children. Let's start off by looking into how we can set up the environment or assist the classroom teacher in setting up the environment and organizing the classroom materials and the classroom. So when we're thinking about the classroom environment, we want to make sure that all of the learners can be observed from every place in the classroom. We also want to make sure that if we have learning centers, that they have clear boundaries and they are in appropriate areas. We want to provide a variety of materials at each of these centers that address the different ability levels and the different interests of the students in the classroom. And we want to make changes to the learning centers on a regular basis. This will help to maintain engagement and keep students interested in the learning centers throughout the classroom. In these learning center areas, you might have to use pictures or labels to show where materials belong. And you also can use pictures, posters, and schedules to help the learners understand what to do when they are in the activities or helping others in the activities. When we think about a classroom environment, this is an example of how a classroom might be set up throughout the classroom. There are different areas. You have a kitchen area, there's a computer area, break area. This is just an example of how a classroom might be set up. You can notice that there's different areas for independent work. There's different areas for student work. There's a designated area for computers. You could see that when there are one-on-one areas throughout the room. There's also an area for direct instruction at the very bottom. This is where you might have your morning groups. This is where teachers might be running full group small group activities, while the paraprofessional is working on one-to-one in the student work areas or assisting students in the different areas. So this is just an example of how a typical classroom might be set up in your school. We want to maintain organization. Organization is key. When we have an organized classroom, we have organized behavior. So we want to make sure that the students have significant physical separation in ways to minimize the occurrence of interfering behaviors. For example, if students are working in their learning centers, we want to make sure that they might have to have some physical separation in order to minimize that behavior of wandering to another center, whether it be a bookcase that might have to block off the learning center area or a divider, just something to make sure that they have that physical space that's theirs to work on. We want to make sure that we label all the areas of the classroom and make sure that we're labeling what behaviors are expected in those areas of the classroom. So if you are assisting a teacher in a classroom that has these learning centers, when students go to the learning centers, we need to teach them how to behave in the learning centers. For example, if they need help, what are what are the protocols for a student to ask for help when they are in a learning center? When they are in a learning center, they're typically in a small group, if not by themselves, working independently. If a student is to get stuck on their work, how are they to ask for attention? You know, thinking about it, the teacher is typically in a small group in the front of the room with a small group of students, teaching these students in a small group. So if we have students constantly coming up to her table to interrupt, there's not much teaching going on. So we need to put in place protocols for what we need to do, whether it be ask 3 before me, you know, that's a rule for the teacher. You need to ask 3 individuals before you ask the teacher, or ask a friend if it's appropriate. So we need to teach these behaviors and what's expected. Providing sufficient space to engage in activities in these learning centers is key. Arranging the seating of the setting where the specific activity occurs. Try to make an attractive learning environment by labeling things, you know, a welcoming environment, whether it be a reading nook or a reading corner, maybe some comfortable seating for students to relax and practice their leisure activities of reading a book. Ensure that the environment is neat and orderly, and all of the materials that are located there in the learning activity. They need to, you know, if they need scissors, they need to be accessible in the learning center, or the students need to know where to access the materials for the particular center. If you have students that are easily distracted, you might have to provide a study corral for them. You could make one on your own. You take manila folders, the manila folders, and you could take them, 2 of them, and tape them together, and it makes a little nice study corral that could stand up on either side of the student's desk, so that way they could focus on their work, and the study corral, the homemade study corral, could keep them from being distracted by their peers or distracting other peers. Visuals are also nice. So let's take a look at some examples. This is an example of an organized space of where students can find different materials for centers or maybe indoor recess. The space is very organized. The students know where to locate the materials, and it's very organized so that they know to put the materials back. It's also an organized space to share different papers and things like that, materials that need to go home. The student mailboxes are very organized and things like that. Here's an example of more materials that might be for examples of learning centers. These are, if you look at the top, McDonald's French fries with pipe cleaners. So that might be a particular learning activity, an independent activity where they take the amount of French fries and match the number and maybe stick them in. But you can see that all the materials are there. The students have been taught possibly in the morning meeting time. They've been introduced to the centers and what's needed to happen and occur when they get to the centers, that, you know, they are to count the number of fries and put them into the corresponding French fry packets. There's a money station there so that students can practice their counting money skills. There's sorting skill activities. There's many different activities. Notice that everything is organized, everything is labeled, and everything has a space. The main thing to do to a lot of times to prevent these, problem behaviors is to also set up the activities before student arrival. So we want to make sure that we, these activities, for example, if we are have to set out table activities for the morning, there's a lot that occurs in the morning, and there's a lot of unstructured time when the buses are coming in. We're taking attendance. We're doing lunch count. Students are coming and going to breakfast. They're asking for bathroom breaks. There's a lot going on for student arrival in the morning. If there is some unstructured time in the morning, that's when behaviors occur. Okay, so we want to make sure, possibly if you notice and you're a paraprofessional in your classroom and there's some behaviors in the morning, possibly suggest setting up table activities for the students to work on in the morning while everything else is going on in the classroom. The management of the classroom, they have to, get all of the attendance, lunch count, everything else. So we need to keep students engaged during this time when we have less supervision. So one adult can supervise while the other is doing the activities of bathroom and arrival, dismissal time. Major thing to keep in mind is though that they should be set up before the end of the day. So that way when the students come in the next day, the materials are ready. We are not giving, plus students get off of the bus and there's fun things for them. Okay. The students are more likely to, come to the classroom in a good mood and maintain that good mood if fun things are waiting for them. So we want to make sure that we're organized and we set up these tasks. If you were getting used to setting up tasks and things like that, you can even move on to task to-do list. If your students are able to keep, a list of things that they are to do and to match, if you notice that on the right-hand side, you'll notice on the purple background, this particular student has their to-do list on the green. They would have to complete bin number 1 and bin number 7. When they complete bin number 1 and bin number 7, then they could move that over to they're all done. So that way that it gives them ownership and organizational skills too. You're helping them. If we have unstructured time, sometimes with less supervision, this could provide a lot of times access to things that students shouldn't be getting into. A good way to prevent students from accessing the blocks whenever they want to, or running over to the dolls, or running over to the Tinker Toys, things like that. And a very easy suggestion that you could make is to block access to those items with this curtain rod. So it's a spring curtain rod, and just put it up, and that would maintain some distance between the student and the blocks and all of the activities. So that way you are in control of when the students can access the materials. These are just a few ways that you can help your classroom teacher set up your classroom environment to make it a more positive experience for the students.